Within hours of Iran launching a large missile barrage against Israel, strikes that hit several cities and military installations, the United States carried out a rapid military response. American cruise missiles struck an Iranian naval vessel operating in the Persian Gulf, sinking it. Follow-up attacks targeted oil storage facilities along Iran's coastline, igniting massive fires that could be seen from miles away. At the same time, United States forces across multiple branches received a combat mobilization order. Units were told to shift immediately to full operational readiness. That order triggered a chain reaction across airfields, bases, and forward deployment zones. At one airfield, the change in posture was already visible. Two CH-53 Sea Stallion heavy-lift helicopters sat on the flight line with their rotors spinning, preparing for departure. Ground crews stayed clear of the powerful rotor wash while final checks were completed. Inside the ready room, helicopter pilots prepared for the mission ahead. They pulled on flight suits, secured survival vests, checked their sidearms, and locked their helmets into place. Every step followed a practiced routine. Nearby, Marines were already lined up in two groups, one group assigned to each aircraft. Each Marine carried a full combat load body armor, helmet, rifle, loaded magazines, grenades, radios, water, and field rations. When the command was given, the first group moved quickly toward the lead CH-53 and boarded through the side personnel door. At the same airfield, another aircraft was preparing for a different type of mission. A CH-47 Chinook sat with its rear ramp lowered as Marines filed into the cargo bay. Unlike the CH-53s, this flight involved transporting heavy equipment. Beneath the helicopter, ground crews were attaching an artillery piece to an external cargo sling, a towed howitzer that would travel suspended under the aircraft during flight. The rigging was inspected repeatedly. Once the crew confirmed the load was secure, the Chinook lifted into the air with the howitzer hanging beneath the fuselage. From the outside, it looked unusual, an artillery gun dangling under a helicopter, but this method allows heavy weapons to reach terrain where trucks or armored vehicles cannot easily travel. The Chinook flew low across the landscape toward a military camp. As it approached the landing area, the aircraft slowed and descended carefully. The crew chief guided the pilots until the howitzer touched the ground. Once the gun was stable, the sling was released. The helicopter moved to a nearby landing point and touched down. Marines exited the aircraft and immediately moved toward the artillery piece. They began setting up the firing position right away. Ammunition crates were opened. The howitzer's trails were spread and anchored into the ground. Spades were dug in for stability. Sights were mounted and rounds were stacked nearby so the gun crew could begin operating without delay. Within minutes, the weapon was ready. As evening approached, two more helicopters arrived at a separate forward location, carrying additional Marines. The aircraft landed in an open area, flat terrain with no buildings, no established shelters, and almost no natural cover. This wasn't a permanent base. It was simply a temporary forward position created wherever the aircraft could land safely. The Marines exited and immediately spread out across the ground. With darkness approaching quickly, they began establishing a defensive perimeter. Crew-served weapons were positioned to cover the most likely approach routes. Watch rotations were assigned. Some Marines started digging shallow fighting positions while others organized equipment. Sleeping bags and ponchos were laid out directly on the ground. Ammunition was kept within arm's reach. Dinner that night consisted of cold rations and water from canteens. As temperatures dropped, the Marines settled in for the night under the open sky. But the position did not stay quiet for long. Throughout the night, helicopters continued flying supply missions to the site. These aircraft approached with their lights off, navigating using night vision equipment. Each arrival brought additional supplies. Crates of ammunition were unloaded. Anti-tank weapons arrived. Mortar tubes and mortar rounds were carried off the aircraft. Cases of radio batteries and medical equipment followed. One of the later flights brought something more mobile. Lightweight tactical buggies were rolled off the rear ramp of a Chinook. The small vehicles were driven away from the landing zone and hidden under camouflage netting. Meanwhile, communication specialists began assembling satellite antennas. Within a short time, they established a direct link with the command post. By sunrise, the location had changed dramatically. What had been an empty patch of ground only hours earlier was now functioning as a forward operating base, with vehicles, weapon systems, communications equipment, and supply stockpiles. It was still a modest setup by military standards, but it was operational. At first light, Marines began moving out from the camp. They broke into squads and headed toward their assigned sectors. Their first objective was reconnaissance. Teams moved slowly across the terrain, carefully observing the surrounding landscape. They identified natural cover, mapped ridge lines, and marked areas of low ground that could conceal enemy movement. They also mapped fields of fire and locations that could potentially be used for ambushes. Every observation was recorded and transmitted back to the command element at the camp. Sniper teams moved separately to elevated positions overlooking the region. Once in place, they unpacked their equipment: precision rifles, bipods, spotting scopes, rangefinders, wind meters, and logbooks. A typical sniper team worked in pairs. One Marine focused on the rifle, the other monitored the terrain through a spotting scope. Together they scanned the landscape in a slow, methodical pattern, measuring distances to key landmarks and documenting anything unusual. At the same time, infantry squads began running through combat drills. They practiced bounding movement across open ground. One fire team advanced while the other provided cover fire. Then the teams switched roles. They rehearsed building entry procedures as well. The routine was precise: stack up at the door, breach the entry point, move inside, clear corners, identify threats, and secure the room. The Marines also practiced moving through low terrain such as wadis and drainage ditches, natural features that can hide troop movement from observation. Every movement was controlled and deliberate. Most of the time they moved crouched or crawling, prioritizing silence and concealment. Squad leaders watched each run closely. If someone moved too slowly, exposed themselves unnecessarily, or made excess noise, the team ran the drill again and again, until every step became automatic. Fire teams also practiced immediate action drills: what to do if they suddenly came under fire from the front, from the flank, or from an ambush. Casualty evacuation procedures were rehearsed as well. Marines practiced dragging a wounded teammate to cover while still maintaining defensive fire. Machine gun teams set up their weapons in both primary and alternate firing positions, then practiced relocating between them under simulated pressure. To an outside observer, it might look repetitive. But that repetition is the point. In real combat, decisions often happen in seconds. Training ensures those decisions are already built into muscle memory. Here's the counterintuitive reality. Much of modern combat preparation isn't about fighting immediately. It's about making sure that if the order comes, every action has already been practiced dozens of times. By the time the training exercise is finished, the Marines returned to the camp. Weapons were cleaned, equipment was checked, defensive positions were maintained, and then they waited. Because when the next combat alert sounds, the expectation is simple. Every Marine on that ground should already know exactly what to do.